thank you for participating with this third panel talk. The last part of the programming for my project offhand. This is actually the last day of the visual presentation of offhand as far as like actual programming. I have to get some of the documentation and bios and things like that on my website, which I will do soon. And then it will continue on in that format indefinitely. And eventually I'll be moving on to the in-person version. So I've been producing offhand from my studio in Lyman, Maine. Offhand is 9 acts, ACTS, exploring symmetry and entropy. Some of the acts are pre-choreographed, pre-composed, or pre-instructed, while other acts are more spontaneous, where the guidance is given right before the act occurs. And I set out to create imagery and sound that was identical but opposite, as if there's a mirror in the stage. And but because we're not robots and there's variation, entropy and disorder and slight variations are inevitable. And that's what I was exploring through this work. So just a second, I'm just gonna close my mail because I don't want it to make that sound. I would like to begin by introducing Philip, and then I'm gonna do other stuff. So, Philip Carlsen, can you wave, Philip, so we can tell who you are, even though we all probably know by now? Philip Carlsen, since retirement in 2015 from the University of Maine at Farmington, where he taught music for 33 years. Composer and cellist, Philip continues to add to an eclectic catalog of compositions. Philip has composed works for the Manhattan Marimba Quartet, Portland Symphony Orchestra, Tobago Long Lakes Region Chamber Music Festival, Bates College Gamelan, Brussels Ballet Theatre, and National Symphony Orchestra chamber players. His work has also been played at Kennedy Center, New York Sound Hall, and the Summer Garden series of the Museum of Modern Art. Philip has received fellowships or commissions from the National Endowment for the Arts, Maine Arts Commission, National Institute of Arts and Letters, and American Composers Alliance. Thank you so much, Philip, for being here and doing this panel talk with me.
It's a pleasure.
So I want to begin by just giving the guidelines for the 2 acts that Philip collaborated with me with for our pen. Philip composed a piece for acts 8 and 9, which I envision being bookends for the acts 1 and 2, which I collaborated with a choreographer to create. I saw these 2 acts as mere reflections of the piece, of the whole project as a whole. For Act 8, I invited Philip to create symmetrical music such that the pre-composed musicians would try to mirror each other. The piece Able Was I is the result. However, for Act 8, I asked the musicians to play the piece wearing noise cancellation headphones and facing away from each other. I'm going to play the I'm going to, before I play the piece, I want to tell you a little bit about things I describe to Philip by sharing my screen. I don't speak music, and I also don't speak dance. So it's really interesting communicating what I meant and what I was looking for. So I'm going to share with you some funny drawings so that I showed Philip. I know. I want to do this. Thank you for your patience. So I drew this picture to try to show Philip what I was talking about, to give him kind of an idea. I told him that I was gonna build these drums out of wood. I had done a little bit of research about wood drums and box drums, and about how their different lengths give different tones, and that if you have if they're hollow and if there's a slice kind of right out of them, that's where it affects the tone and the way the sound comes out. And then I was trying to convey to him that, so say there happens to be two percussionists playing these box drums. The percussionist on the right could perhaps be raising their right hand, while the percussionist on the left is raising their left hand, and so on. So their movements are symmetrical, just as the music might be symmetrical. And then I said it would be really cool if there could be two string instruments, perhaps cello, where the bows are going in and out from the center as if they are mirror image from each other. And so one would be playing opposite hands from each other. So this was like how I was explaining. And I also made a note that at the very beginning of the piece, it would be really cool if be really helpful if the very beginning of the piece, the very first notes had very minimal symmetry, so that the audience would be able to pick up on really quickly what's happening. And then I also sent him a picture of these drums that I was having my carpenter make. So let me play Act 8. Okay. Before you talk about your process, I want to mention something about a last minute what is it called? Last minute change that I made right before they played the piece. So I had made Philip aware, of course, that for Act 8, people would be wearing noise cancellation headphones and facing away from each other. And I was really, I think I was really impacted by how differently the paces were from the different dancers danced. They did for Act 2 a similar thing where they were choreographed, they were instructed to do a choreography. They were also wearing noise cancellation headphones, and they too were away from each other and started at different times. They started at very distinct different times and were going at different paces. And right before the musicians all started playing with their noise cancellation headphones on, facing away from each other, I asked, they're all very experienced musicians, and I said, do you feel like if you're counted down that you would be able, that your tempo is gonna be pretty similar to what you hear? And it was kind of half and half, well, my understanding, there's kind of half and half. Some said that it'll really be nothing, and so I can't remember who, but at the very last minute somebody said it's gonna be really similar to the tempo. So at the very last minute, instead of just putting the noise cancellation headphones on and having them try to keep the tempo without being able to hear each other, I asked each to choose their own tempo, which is very different from what I had originally planned to do. And it was a very interesting experiment. And for the in-person, I want to stay true to what I originally envisioned and just see what happens and let go a little more. I don't regret what I did, but because I think it's really cool what happened. But I would like to try it the other way as well, as I originally wanted to. Everyone was really nice about just kind of going with it. So anyway, Philip, I wondered if you could talk about anything you want to talk about regarding your process of composing something within this framework. Your just kind of how what you started thinking about, your progression as it developed and things like that. Anything you want to share. And I do have a PDF of the sheet music that has all four of the players on it if you need me to share my screen and show that
Right.
at any point.
Yeah. You know, one thing I was trying to remember is why you and I decided to collaborate here. And I think we had known one another already and knew that we had some similar interests. And I've admired your pieces for a long time. And I'm wondering, do you remember how it happened that you came to me and asked whether I might?
Yes, so I knew that I wanted, I think someone has some sound on. So somebody mute yourself, whoever has that sound on, or is it me?
And we probably say that with the monster today, again in the 60s, with a couple of sprinkles around. Surprise after the war.
Okay, I figured it out.
Yeah.
Okay, so I knew that I wanted to do this this project offhand, and I had met you when you had come to some of my biennials, I believe. But I ran into you again at it was one of the Portland Museum of Art's projects that they do where poets respond to art in the collection.
Oh, yes. Was it the art word? And
yeah, it was one that both Nancy and Jerry were reading work at, and I saw you in the lobby, and you and Jerry were together, and I knew you were a composer, but somehow as people were introducing each other, I was reminded that you were a composer. And I said, well, obviously, I should ask Philip first. It was that simple. Because you're familiar with my work. And off the top of, I was also, just there it was. And it made sense. It was similarly how the choreographer, you came into my life at that precise moment when I was beginning to develop the
idea. It seemed like the timing and everything was just right. When you talked about my background, it's an eclectic background, as you said, and so especially in retirement, I've really embraced the idea of doing projects that stretch me in different ways. I did a big band piece. I hadn't done that before. I did a piece for 8 flutes. I'd never done that before. And so this came along and I thought, oh yeah, I'm interested in doing that. And I think that when we were talking, first of all, you were thinking in terms of 2 cellos. And I knew that if I went ahead with this, that I would have to be the one who learned to play the cello backwards. I couldn't realistically go to somebody else and say, okay, can I hire you for this gig? You're going to have to learn to play your instrument backwards to do this. So
right, and also you would be practicing. You'd have more time to practice as opposed to hitting that person up with that information at the last minute.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So that was a very strange process to learn how to play the instrument backwards, because for one thing, my right hand is not used to touching the strings, and I didn't have calluses on my fingers, and holding the bow was a very tense kind of thing. And I think about when I was learning cello or having cello students and trying to encourage them to be as relaxed as possible and find a position to play that would not create strain. And so I had to try to keep that in mind as I was learning how to play backwards. And it was a long process, and I could just play a few minutes a day. And so when I was writing the music, I made sure to write music that would be within my capabilities as a cellist. Here's the other thing I was thinking about. Well, I don't think that we had percussion as originally a part of it. That I raised that idea with you, and you thought, yeah, and
Yeah, I don't remember. I think the very first was I was thinking 2 cellists, 2 dancers.
right.
And
right.
then you said it'd be really cool to add some more dynamics and have 2 more players playing something else. And that's right. And you, I can't remember the other possibilities that you mentioned. It wasn't necessarily percussion right away. I think it was some other instrument.
Right.
But percussion and cello made the most sense to me because of the grander arm movements, like the really obvious, you can really see the symmetry in the movement.
Exactly.
Whereas like a flute, would be more subtle.
Right. And as I was writing the music for cello, I was very conscious of the 2 hands functioning sort of like the 2 hands of a percussionist, so that, especially going backwards with one of them, to really think in terms of left and right, both instruments coming down on the instrument, both hands coming down on the instrument in their own individual ways. And so there are gestures that the percussionists do in the piece that are comparable to gestures that the cellists are doing. And as you say, both instruments have a very strong visual element. There's a kind of dance going on in playing these instruments. And so a lot of the gestures that the cellists were making in this piece are things that we do all the time anyway, but I just exaggerated them and wrote into the music instructions to freeze after you've done a big swoop, or things like bringing your hands above and then back down again together. So the gestures, all the gestures are idiomatic to the cello, but just exaggerated. And also for the percussionists.
Yeah. One thing that blew my mind during the process of all this was, in my non-music speak, you explaining to me how now I'm going to play left-handed, but I can't reverse the strings. So I'm not. So the music isn't the strings and the tones are not going to be like symmetrical to each other. Can you say more about that in your own way, because I might have butchered it?
I'll try. Well, let me take the percussionists first. They are each playing on instruments with 9 blocks on them, going from large to small. And so because they're mirroring, when one player is playing with their right hand on a small block, the other player is playing with their left hand, but also on a small block. So the sound that's coming out is basically duplicated, even though their gestures are mirrored. With the cellists mirroring their gestures, but not reversing the strings, it means that when one player is playing on the high string, the A string, the other is playing on the C string. So there's a kind of symmetry there, that when one instrument is high, the other is low, and vice versa. On the other hand, when the fingers are on the string and going up in pitch, both instruments are going to be going up in pitch at the same time when they're on a single string. The difference is that one of them will be going up in pitch, let's say on the D string, and the other one going up in pitch on the G string, so that you get this a constant harmony from the instruments as they're playing, which to me musically is more interesting than having them playing exactly the same thing, which would happen if the strings were reversed. So.
And then can you talk about the music itself? Things you thought about to make the music itself symmetrical? the actual notes and their tempo and the space between the notes and things like that.
Well, as the title "Able Was I" implies, the music is a palindrome, basically a palindrome. So, and it's in 3 sections. The first section is 9 gestures that are each 9 beats long. And the middle section is 9 gestures, which are each 15 beats long. And then you get to the final section, and it's another, basically replicating the first section, but in reverse. And each of the sections actually is a palindrome as well. I don't know if that fully makes sense, but so it's sort of like every 3 bars in the music at the beginning, something new happens. And you had suggested to me that you wanted to have 9 notes at the beginning.
Yeah, something simple,
Right.
so that people could pick up on the symmetry that's happening, whether they get it or not. That something so that I did the same thing with the choreographer.
Right.
9 simple movements to start with, so that the audience will really get a sense right away of what's happening before it gets more complex.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I interpreted that as not 9 simple notes, but 9 gestures, and tried to incorporate physical gestures, recognizable physical gestures, as part of the musical gesture for those initial 9 events. Can't exactly call them notes.
Okay, yeah. I would like to play the Act 9 now.
Mm-hmm.
And before I do, just show really quickly the sheet music. With oh my gosh, I didn't even share my sound. Were you guys able to hear that at all? When I played Act 8?
The sound was distorted, but it did come through.
Oh my gosh. I apologize. If you want, I can play it again, but I think have you all seen it? Act 8? Do you need me to play Act 8 again, or do you?
No.
No? Okay. I apologize. I thought that I had done that. I'm a lame host. Okay. So I wanted to show you what Philip sent me for the sheet music, because I constructed the music stands so that they would be minimal, because they needed the sheet music to read, and he said this is the sheet music, and I just thought it's just so beautiful in and of itself. And I commented, I have no idea what this means, what any of this means, but it's just all so beautiful. And as you can see, this has the different musicians' parts. And then he also output so that each box drums 1, box drums 2, they would each have their own separate sheet music, and it was important to figure out which sheet music had to go on what side and stuff like that. I just wanted to show you this real quick, because I thought people in the audience would appreciate what this looks like. And I'm also gonna add it. Look how beautiful that is. It's like I see it as it's like a drawing. A drawing with lots of different dimensions, because it also has movement and sound in all these marks. I just really appreciate what the music looks like a lot.
Amy, can you hear me?
Yes.
I would say that's one of the things that really drew me to composition as a career is the visual aspect of the scores. There's one of my Facebook friends is the pianist Beth Levin, and she does very interesting postings, and periodically she'll give a posting of somebody's music manuscript, and her heading is always music notation is beautiful. And it truly is. Just separate sounds. So
it's just a beautiful thing to even look at. So act 9, and this time I'll share my sound. I apologize. I invited composer Philip Carlsen to create symmetrical music, such that the pre-composed musicians would try to mirror each other. Abel was I as a result. So now we get to hear them play it without the noise cancellation headphones. This is a totally different experience.
I wanted to say something about Act 8.
Yes.
Because the noise cancellation headphones did not totally cancel the noise.
No.
No. And so I put mine on, and I'm counting up to, because we were going to count to 9, each of us, before we started playing. And I got up to about 6, and I heard that Matt had started playing. And so, all right, well, I'll go all the way up to 9 and I'll get started. And so I think that because he had already started, I thought, well, I'd better play just a little bit faster then. And you notice that in Act 8, I finished first. And so I was sort of not expecting that I would be able to hear things so well, but I really could hear a lot of what was going on. And I'm intrigued what would happen if we really couldn't hear.
Yeah.
You know, it feels like a piece that has offhand, it sort of opens up possibilities that we have only begun to explore.
Yeah, I agree.
In terms of how this could be done. It'd be interesting to see what would happen, for example, if the cellists were reversed so that their bows were on the outside.
Yeah.
The way we're positioned now, the bows are partially hidden by our instruments. And if
because of the way they're turned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, so those are just some of the things to, you know, consider as.
Oh yeah, I'm very excited about the in-person version will have a bigger stage, which, you know, the smaller stage there created some limitations for the frame. For example, with the Act 9 that we just watched, the music stands, which needed to be in front of the players, hid a lot of their arm movements. Like you said, because of the limitation, you know, I had to have you two you could only be so close together because of your wingspans.
Right.
So yeah, it was I really look forward to being able to do this on the bigger stage, more closer to how I envision.
Right.
And as a beginner noise cancellation headphone facilitator, the whole thing was just funny because I practiced just getting them turned on and going is a whole adventure. And I did all this research, like what's gonna happen if there's 4 different people listening to 4 different, they were listening essentially to static that was really loud. I didn't want it to be a tone. They could affect, I don't know, I thought it could affect the music that they're hearing somehow.
Yeah.
So they were listening to this really loud, annoying static in their ears. Yeah. And I did all this research trying to find the headphones that would completely cancel out the noise, and there just isn't any unless you play it super duper ear hurting loud. So yeah, I realized that you were especially going to be able to hear the percussionist, but perhaps you're able to hear the cello as well. It sounds like, because you heard Matthew.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was all really interesting. Oh, before I forget, because there's just like 10 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions for Philip or myself about this collaboration? Nancy?
Well, knowing that it started back at Artwork makes me feel all fuzzy inside. I'm sure it does Jerry too, you know, because that ties into our poetry and puts us into it in some small way, which is great to know. And it explains how you could possibly wrap your head around playing the cello backwards, which just blows my mind, you know, but that seems like a long time ago to me. But, and I just don't understand how you could manage that. Did it hurt your mind to do that?
I think it was more physically painful than mentally painful.
Oh.
It did hurt, and I would tend to tense up and not be able to play very long. But
what a trooper!
I don't know if it helps that I'm left-handed to begin with, so that it didn't feel totally awkward to be bowing and to get the bow moving in the right direction and to keep it on the string position between the bridge and the end of the fingerboard. And having written the music specifically for that and conceived the gestures and the motions, you know, working out the composition on the instrument itself. But it was an experience.
Well, I suppose that playing an instrument, it's not quite the same as trying to write with your opposite hand. It's not quite as innately wired in your head as that.
Right, and
I would think years of doing it that way would be almost as wired that way.
Exactly. There are very few players. We know of guitarists and bass players who play the instrument backwards.
Right.
And I know of at least one violinist who plays the instrument backwards, which is a very weird and unsettling thing to watch for a musician. I've never heard of cellists who do it backwards. But you know, there's no inherent reason that it has to be one way or the other. And it's just how you learn it. And the instrument is built in a kind of slightly asymmetrical way because you have these very thick lower strings, the C string on the instrument that on one side and the A string on the other side. And so the construction of the instrument has to take that into account.